So, I don't know about you, but I haven't been particularly enamored with many of the big sci-fi outings of late. This year alone, I didn't really connect with Foundation or For All Mankind's second season, and while I've loved having the Star Trek franchise back in full swing, Lower Decks is now finished up for the year, and while I've enjoyed Discovery, outside of a few truly excellent moments, it has never quite clicked with me. The final season of The Expanse is still a while out, as is Star Trek Strange New Worlds, both of which I am really quite hopeful for. However, at the present moment I have found myself in lieu of anything contemporary to really hold my interest. So I did what I often do at times like this. I looked back for a missed classic, something a little nostalgic to tide me over, and I hit upon this. If I'm honest, when I decided to start watching this show, I wasn't looking for anything particularly emotionally or intellectually engaging. From the outside at least, I was expecting something more akin to the original Battlestar Galactica, a show that, while presenting some interesting ideas and themes, mostly lands pretty squarely in the zone of trashy space adventure. I don't mean this as a knock against the original Battlestar. I had a lot of fun watching it, and it killed a few evenings, but I don't often find myself pondering the meaning of the show or the nature of its characters. And I must admit, Space 1999's pilot did little to assuage me of this preconception. For those unfamiliar, which is hopefully at least a couple of you, the premise of this show sees a massive explosion launch the moon out of orbit and the crew of the lunar settlement Moonbase Alpha along with it. The series follows, and I shit you not, this is true, the crew of the Moonbase struggling to survive as they ride the moon through the cosmos. Yeah, right? I mean, it's absolutely batshit insane, and you know what? I love it. The pace is undoubtedly a little slower than the original Battlestar Galactica, or something like Star Wars, and the tone a little more somber, but it seemed, at least initially, that I was in for another fairly easygoing, rather campy adventure show to help me pass another few bored evenings away. Oh boy, was I in for a surprise. Black Sun was the third episode of 99 that I watched. It opens with the moon on course for a black hole and seemingly inevitable destruction. At the beginning, I honestly thought I knew how this episode would go. There'd be a lot of technobabble, they'd pull some bullshit solution out of their ass at the last possible moment, somehow dodge the black hole, maybe throw a cheap all is lost moment in, and ta-da, another episode of television down, another hour of my life killed. And while this isn't an entirely inaccurate supposition, there was quite a bit more to this story than I expected. As the moon falls towards the black hole, the command staff try to rig up a force field, repurposing some of the made-up sci-fi gizmos that give their moon base and its fleet of Eagle spacecraft their artificial gravity. But everyone seems pretty sure that it's absolutely hopeless. The exercise is more about keeping up morale. Commander Koenig even orders the shield raised early despite critically low power, just to reassure the base's population and provide some sense of hope. But as the end seems near, he orders the one ship that was not cannibalized for the shield loaded with fuel and a few would-be survivors chosen by the base's computer. The Eagle is launched and the moon falls into the black hole. This episode ends not so subtly implying that a greater cosmic power had a hand in the moon's survival, both now and in the first episode when it was blasted out of orbit. As the moon falls into the black hole, it seems that they are somehow guided through. The crew of Moonbase Alpha in a dreamlike state exchange words with a kind and caring soul before emerging in a distant part of the universe, the lifeboat Eagle miraculously alongside them. To be quite honest, I'm not entirely sure this episode sticks the landing. It's quite cheesy, but I still came away with a wonderful sense of awe. This episode is so much more gentle and somber than I expected going in. The conversations between the leads and their performances speak to a rich personal history between these characters, even though it's just a few episodes in.
To everything that might have been. To everything that was.
And the artwork. This episode is the first real showcase of what I think is one of Space 1999's greatest assets. Many of the space environments are depicted by these wonderful matte paintings. And in this episode in particular, it lends the setting a wonderfully surreal quality. It may not have the flashiness the likes of which Christopher Nolan delights us with now, but 50 years removed from its original production, there's something wonderfully novel about it. Not to mention there's this killer aesthetic poached right out of 2001: A Space Odyssey. Oh man, was this another one I didn't see coming. A crew of alien refugees on their way to Earth happen upon the moon, now deeply lost in space. Yeah, I know, just roll with it. Their ship crash lands and the crew of Alpha set out to investigate, finding the aliens in suspended animation. In their attempt to wake the aliens, one of their number is killed, but the rest revive safely. They seem a little aloof and suspicious, but the crew of Alpha welcome them nonetheless. The Alphans set about helping the refugees repair their ship for the long voyage towards Earth, a full 75 years by their reckoning, and they offer the one empty space aboard their ship to the Alphans. One of their number may return to Earth, sleeping away the 75-year voyage in suspended animation.
Well, thank you, Captain. It's a most generous offer.
Commander Koenig puts it to a computer-decided lottery, while the aliens work with Helena, the base doctor, to prepare their technology to accept humans. However, one of the base's crew, a man named Simmons, unhappy with his life on Alpha, forces the situation, taking a hostage and making his way onto the ship at gunpoint. In their rushed departure, there is no time to adequately prepare the berth in which he will sleep, and as a result, he awakens just a few hours into the flight. At first believing himself to have made the trip, only to then check the time and realize with horror that he is trapped in his pod, surrounded by the sleeping aliens which he is unable to rouse from their slumber. Frantically, he radios for help, but the alien ship has traveled much too far for any ship from Alpha to have any hope of intercept.
Help me, Koenig! Koenig, help me!
There's nothing we can do.
Koenig! Can you hear me, Koenig? Answer me! Koenig! Sandor! Sandor! Sandor!
In a final twist of irony, Koenig reveals that the man chosen by the computer to return to Earth was in fact Simmons. If Black Sun had hinted this show was willing to go places, here was the confirmation. What a wonderfully dark and twisted story. Edgar Allan Poe himself would be proud. This was the episode that fully demonstrated to me that this show was more than just a way to pass time, and when it wanted to, it could come out swinging. The end of this episode comes with that all too palpable sense of horror that comes with somehow both being buried alive and set adrift alone in space simultaneously.
Help me! Someone! I gotta get out! I gotta get out! For God's sake, help me! This particular episode is a what might have been story.
it would find itself right at home in the Twilight Zone. It evokes that wonderful sense of sadness and hope in the vein of episodes like Walking Distance, a personal favourite of mine. As the moon plunges through a mysterious energy vortex, it seems that everything and everyone is doubled for an instant before returning to normal. However, a member of the crew has a seemingly schizophrenic episode, remembering things that didn't happen, including the death of Commander Koenig and Llaren, one of the base's Eagle pilots. As the moon emerges from the energy vortex, they find themselves on course to settle into orbit around the now ruined planet Earth, perhaps laid waste in the explosion when the moon departed. There is one catch, however. Another moon, seemingly identical, is already in orbit and in their path. Llaren and Koenig take an Eagle to explore this other moon. They find another moonbase Alpha, now abandoned and stripped for resources, as well as a crashed Eagle containing the long-dead bodies of Commander Koenig and Llaren. As the two moons near each other, Regina, the crew member seemingly experiencing memories from both crews, becomes more disturbed, and she eventually dies. As the Alphans explore the Earth below in preparation for their own evacuation, they come upon the inhabitants of the other moon, now settled in a valley and living a peaceful life, save for the recent death of their own Regina, who was similarly afflicted with memories not her own. As more of the crew meet their counterparts, the affliction that began with Regina spreads to others. It seems that the two crews are unable to occupy the same space and same time without dire consequences. With little choice remaining to them, the Alphans return to their moon and await the collision with the duplicate. And as the collision comes, the moon is once again engulfed by the strange forces that brought it here in the first place, and is whisked back to its original time and place. The crew are left with a vision of what life might be like should they too be lucky enough to find a new world to call home, as well as the knowledge that somewhere and somehow they kinda already did. And it is abundantly clear what a powerful and deeply emotional vision this is for the Alphans. And I think most of us might wonder at some point what will become of our lives, and what it would be like to receive a vision of a path yet to be travelled. This episode is a bit of a convoluted mess, if I'm honest. Like Black Sun, it's far from perfect, and yet I find myself strangely enamored with it. It somehow really gets across this feeling of awe and melancholy and hope in spite of its oft messy delivery. It's just got vibes, you know? So, is Space 1999 any good then? Well, yes and no. As it stands, I'm only about halfway through the first season, and the episodes I've highlighted here have been the major standouts, though there's been a few other good ones too. Unfortunately, there have also been a few pretty meh episodes. Nothing offensively bad, but definitely a couple of dull outings. Mixed in amongst the episodes I've mentioned were a few more action and thriller-oriented stories, which generally didn't grab me as much. I think they had a harder time filling their runtime, often being fine in concept but a little slow to keep me riveted, and unfortunately made much more egregious use of the reset button. As a final, somewhat amusing note, evidently the Alphans buy their Eagles at the same store the crew of Voyager buy their shuttlecraft and torpedoes. There's something I've been missing in contemporary television sci-fi. Well, not one thing exactly, more like a collection of things. But it was always kind of nebulous and hard for me to pin down. Big, season-long arcs just weren't really delivering, something I'm sure we all felt when Game of Thrones fell apart around its 5th season onwards. And while that might be the most salient example, it's hardly alone. The aforementioned For All Mankind and Foundation also stick out to me. In general, this has led me to have something of a distrust of the mystery box method of storytelling. A lot of shows I've seen recently devote incredible amounts of their runtime to these big mysteries that either don't get paid off at all, or really fail to stick the landing, often at the expense of what the show was already doing well, such as compelling character drama. And I think in our rush headlong into the era of big-budget, prestige drama television that we live in now, we've been a little too eager to forget some of the things that television of the past did right. The Expanse is one of my favourite shows. It's brilliant, but it's also dense as hell. Every scrap of its runtime is devoted to a grand narrative and high-stakes character drama. There's almost never any time to slow down and catch your breath and just hang out with its characters. It's boom, and just on to the next crisis. By contrast, the smaller setting, slower pace, and more episodic structure makes Space 1999 a much less daunting task to watch, preventing the same sense of overwhelm and fatigue I often feel at even my more beloved contemporary sci-fi outings. Yet, this is also a double-edged sword, as some episodes move at a frightfully dull crawl and, worse yet, arrive nowhere. The episodic structure prevents any one bad episode from ruining the series overall, but by the same token it can never quite settle into a cohesive whole, as the episodes have little to do with each other besides share the characters and setting. And while I don't think the total abandonment of serialized story structure is at all the way to go, I think a lot of contemporary sci-fi outings could stand to remember their more episodic roots. Shout out to sci-fi shows of the 90s and early 2000s, a lot of whom I think absolutely nailed this balance. And sorry, just a tangent here for a second. Do you know what I really miss? Feeling like watching something and just being able to pick out a random episode and get a complete story? I mean, you just can't do that with many, if not most, shows now, at least in the sci-fi genre. Foundation in particular has been absolutely driving me up the wall with its incessant need to end on major cliffhangers, some of which are crowbarred in with all the finesse of a Klingon in a mosh pit. And as I mentioned, The Expanse is one of my favourite shows, period, but to get a complete arc, at best you're committing to a whole season. Some shows are, of course, taking the opposite approach, forming totally disconnected anthologies. Black Mirror, The Twilight Zone revival, Love, Death and Robots, to name a few. These all offer complete individualized stories, but at the expense of not really building a cohesive world or enduring characters. I really miss the middle ground. The only one I've seen come close in recent years was Tales from the Loop, an anthology series that was all set in the same town. Its episodes were a bit hit and miss, but the good ones were really good, and the meh ones didn't really bring down the series overall. Anyway, back to Space 1999. Another thing I find myself really appreciating is this show's embrace of its ridiculous premise and willingness to just roll with fantastical bullshit. It gives it a freedom to explore realms that few other shows can. In particular, I love this show's willingness to delve into the realms of cosmic horror and the Twilight Zone-esque mystery. It's nice to see that kind of faith in the audience to suspend their disbelief, rather than expending runtime to try and justify what's going on in some futile attempt to stay grounded. As I continue on to the latter half of the first season, I expect the show's quality will continue to be about as hit and miss as it has been so far. It's just par for the course of sci-fi of this era, I think. Certainly my experiences watching the original Star Trek, Thunderbirds, Blake 7, or classic Doctor Who seem to bear this out. However, like those other shows, there are significant strokes of excellence here within that I really wanted to highlight. If you are looking for something to pass a few nights and maybe even surprise you with some genuinely lovely and engaging storytelling, then I think you'll find something wonderful in Space 1999. So, future Llaren here. In the time since writing the script for this vid, I have finished out the remainder of Space 1999's first season. I had really hoped to have this out earlier, but hey, what can you do? The remainder of the season went pretty much as I predicted, a mix of strong, average, and a couple of weak episodes, but overall, thoroughly enjoyable. Dragon's Domain and Mission of the Darians stuck out in particular to me, both of which were excellent episodes, and the theme of divine intervention by a higher power continued to permeate the series overall. It's almost a forerunner to the kind of things that get explored in the reboot of Battlestar Galactica, and in my opinion, it's one of this and that series' stronger elements. It's something sci-fi often shies away from taking at face value. There always has to be some kind of twist.
What does God need with a starship?
I'm glad to see it here, played straight and in good faith. Also, fun fact, it turns out a lot of Space 1999 is on YouTube, so down below I've linked my favorite episodes if you'd rather not commit to the whole season but would still like to see the better episodes the show has to offer. And now we get to the bit I'm dreading recording. It's the Patreon plug. I'm sure by now you've seen enough of these kinds of videos to guess roughly what I'm gonna say, but if you like the vid and feel able, I would greatly appreciate the support. These are extremely early days, and I'm not sure what perks I'll be able to put out there for patrons or what my upload schedule is gonna look like, but it really would mean the world to me if you supported me. The link to my Patreon is in the down below. And with that, I shall say farewell until next time. If you stuck it out to the end here, then for that alone, I thank you.